My name is Daniel Hayes, and right there at my mother's funeral, my father stood in the middle of the church, pointed straight at me, and told everyone I was a spare child, and that now I had betrayed the family. No tears, no embrace, just a cold kidney donation form placed in front of me, next to the casket that hadn't even been closed yet. Have you ever been turned into a backup plan for someone else, even during the most devastating moment of your life? I used to think I was part of this family. But that day, I didn't just lose my mom. I lost the illusion of belonging. If you've ever been blindsided like that, leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to hear the next part of this story, a journey I never thought I'd have to walk alone. Because the worst part was still waiting ahead. I left the church that day without saying a word. No one stopped me. No hand, no glance, just the sound of my heels stepping down the cold stone steps where the October leaves swirled as if they too wanted to escape that place. I was still holding the kidney donation form in my hand, unsigned, the creases now wrinkled from how tightly I'd clenched it. The rental car was already waiting outside. The driver nodded politely as I got in. I don't remember what I said. Maybe it was, "Take me to Mom's house." Then silence. The wind blew through the crack in the window, carrying the smell of earth after rain, the familiar scent from the garden my mother used to tend every morning. And whenever I came home early from work, she would leave a sprig of lavender on the windowsill. No note, just that, quietly, gently. Now that window was shut, and she lay beneath cold, damp earth in the cemetery at the edge of the hill. When I stepped into the old house, the air felt heavier. Not because of the dust, but the memories. Every wall, every photo frame seemed to whisper the things I used to believe were true. The family photos. Dad, Mom, and Melissa. I had my own little corner, smaller, tucked next to the dining table. Mom used to say it was where the morning light hits just right. I used to believe that too. I walked upstairs and opened my mother's bedroom door. The familiar scent hit me. Pine wood, a hint of lavender, and the hand cream she always used before bed. I sat down next to her small writing desk. The navy blue notebook was still there, left open like she'd just stepped away to make tea. The last few lines were shaky, but still legible. Danielle always thought she was truly loved. But if she ever finds out the real reason, will she still see me the same? I froze. I couldn't turn the next page. My hand trembled on the spine of the notebook. My heart slowed, bracing for a blow. A question with no answer, no explanation, no apology. She never meant for me to know. But now she wasn't here to keep the secret. I stood up, opened the desk drawer, and pulled out the small wooden box she had always kept locked. The key was in her nightstand drawer, the same place I'd once seen her tuck away spare cash from grocery savings. I turned the lock. The soft click echoed like thunder in the silence. Inside was a thick folder, carefully wrapped in a clear plastic sleeve. The bold letters at the top read, "Adoption File, Danielle Marisol Beck." I went numb. Not because of the word adoption, I'd already heard that loud and clear from my father in front of the crowd that morning, but because of the name crossed out in red ink. Marisol Beck. A name I didn't recognize. But it was mine. I didn't know who I was anymore. Everything I thought I knew, my name, my role in the family, even the reason I existed, was now just a carefully constructed facade. They didn't just hide me. They rewrote me like I was a software program they needed to reconfigure to fit into their family system. I flipped through the file. Vaccination records, birth certificate application, handwritten letters from an adoption agency in Arizona, all labeled confidential. A note without a recipient. Marisol meets all medical criteria. No hereditary illness. Blood type O. High compatibility with Melissa. My throat tightened. I used to think Mom's love was unconditional. That the times she kept me home while Melissa went on field trips were out of concern I'd catch a cold. That her monitoring of my diet was just to make sure I was healthy. But now each memory pieced itself together into a broken image. Not love, but control. I remembered a time, when I was 10, I collapsed from a fever during a Halloween parade. Mom didn't cry. She didn't panic. She just said, "You have to keep your body clean, Danielle. That's the most important thing." Back then, I didn't understand. Now I do. Clean wasn't for me. It was for them. I stepped to the mirror, opened the cabinet, and looked at myself. That face didn't resemble anyone in the house. I used to think I inherited it from some distant great-grandmother. Now I saw a face molded to fit the role of someone else's backup. A message alert popped up. My best friend from high school, the only person who ever questioned the way my family treated me. I opened the text. "Danielle, I saw the funeral clip on Reddit. I still have the voice recording where Melissa said, 'She doesn't even know she's my kidney backup. Want to hear it?'" I let the phone slip onto the bed and sank down, crying without sound. Not because of Melissa. Not because of Mom. But because of me. The girl who had tried to be good, kind, hard-working, to earn a love that was never real. In that numb silence, I remembered what Mom once told me when I asked why I couldn't go out like Melissa. "You're special. I can't let anything happen to you." Now I understood. They didn't raise me out of love. They raised me like a medical device wrapped in a human shell. And the most horrifying part? I believed them for over 20 years. Have you ever felt that the love you received came with conditions? Don't miss the next part. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of nightmares, but because of something slower, steadier. Memories lining up like files on a shelf, waiting to be named. I sat in Mom's living room under the glow of a bronze table lamp. In front of me, the adoption documents lay wide open. Application forms, birth certificate copies, a letter postmarked from Arizona, and that slip with Marisol Beck slashed through in red ink. That unfamiliar name pierced me like a cold needle. I was still me, but the name I'd just touched had shifted my entire life sideways, like the ground itself had changed direction. At dawn, when the garbage trucks rumbled down the street and the sparrows picked at the first slivers of sunlight, I booked a flight. Raleigh, Dallas, Tucson. I didn't pack much, just a shoulder bag with a document pocket, a laptop, and a snapshot from Christmas. Mom holding Melissa close. I stood outside the frame, holding a tray of cookies, wearing a half smile. Back then, I thought I belonged. Now, the photo told a different truth. I had always been standing outside. The Arizona sun threw sharp white streaks across the tarmac as the plane landed. The air here was dry and honest. It didn't hide anything. The taxi driver asked where to. I read the address from the file. Sonoran Family Transitions. That building was so easy to miss that I almost walked right past it. A 2-story gray square with peeling paint, sun-blacking paper taped to the windows, and an old metal sign hanging crooked. I rang the bell. The chime was faint and long, like a sigh. The door opened. A tall, slender woman with neatly tied silver hair and pale brown eyes scanned me for a few seconds before softening. "Who are you looking for?" she asked, her voice low and raspy, like someone who had spoken to many people over many years. "I was adopted from here in 2001. I held out the folder. "The name on the old documents is Marisol Beck. I wanted to know if there's still any record related to me." She tilted her head slightly, studied the folder for a long beat, then opened the door wider. "Come in. I'm Ruth. I used to handle archives here." "Marisol," she repeated slowly. "That name sounds familiar." Inside smelled of damp paper, old wood, and something that only places where silence has been preserved for years can have. The scent of stories never fully told. Ruth led me down a narrow hallway lined with framed photos of children once placed with families. A few frames were empty, faded. At the end of the hall was the archive room, walls lined with metal cabinets. She grabbed a set of keys, picked the drawer labeled 2001D, unlocked it, and slid it open. "We sort by year and batch," she said, more to herself than to me. "Ah, here it is." She pulled out a thin file labeled Beck Marisol and laid it open on the table. Typed lines, handwritten fields in blue ink, faint red legal stamps. Ruth flipped through a few pages and paused, her brows furrowing just slightly. "This is unusual." My heartbeat slowed. "Unusual how?" "Most files are signed by the biological parents or guardians. Here, the relinquishment form is signed by a medical institution on behalf of the family." She turned the file toward me. On the page, a line in capital letters stood out: Wellspring Medical Foundation. Below it read, "We, acting as representatives, agree to transfer guardianship of infant Marisol Beck to the designated adoptive family per relevant medical file." My voice turned hoarse. "Relevant medical file? So, they picked me for medical reasons?" Ruth didn't answer immediately. She folded her hands and looked at me over her glasses. That year, there were a few cases like this. Very rare. Families with chronically ill children sometimes came to private medical institutions for consultation. Our role was administrative, checking paperwork, ensuring all parties signed accordingly. And, she exhaled softly, we usually weren't told the full why. I nodded, not because I understood, but to keep myself steady. Ruth turned another page. A supplemental sheet appeared, its paper yellowed, corner folded. At the top, infant biological markers summary. Under blood type, O positive, in the margin a handwritten note. Compatible with profile Melissa Hayes, code 91 Hayes RH. My lungs felt like someone had turned the valve halfway shut. I stared at those sterile numbers like I was reading my name for the first time, but in a grammar made for objects. "May I get a full copy of this file?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Yes," Ruth nodded. "It'll take a moment to print and certify." She got up and moved toward the old printer in the corner. While waiting, I looked around the room. Numbered file boxes, stacks of paper tied with string, a few Polaroids clipped inside folders. Tiny faces looking directly at the camera, unaware they were about to leave the place they began. Ruth returned and placed a thick envelope in front of me. "Danielle," she said my name the way older folks do when they want to soften the moment with you. "I can't undo anything, but here's one more piece." She unfolded another sheet, a shipping receipt from Tucson to Raleigh, June 2001. Recipient: "Does that name mean anything to you?" I shook my head. In Raleigh, our family doctor had a different last name. "TH," I murmured. "Just 2 empty letters." "If you'd like, I can show you our old shift logs," Ruth offered. Sometimes staff left informal notes. We moved to a small adjacent room. On the shelf were thick, fabric-bound ledgers. Ruth pulled the one from summer 2001. Amid countless handwritten lines, I spotted a short, scratchy, but clear entry. Placement 6/17, Beck Marisol. Wellspring confirmed, family, Hayes, Raleigh. Reason, medical specificity. Contact, J. Pike. Caseworker. "Who is J. Pike?" I asked. "Janet Pike," Ruth replied. "She was a caseworker here back then. Later moved to Phoenix. I don't keep in touch, but..." She opened a drawer and pulled out an old index card box. Sometimes Janet wrote numbers on the back. "Ah, here." She handed me a small card. On the edge, faint pencil marks spelled out a half-erased phone number. I snapped a photo of it with my phone and noted the date. It felt like tugging one thread loose from a densely woven rug. "Thank you, Ruth," I said. "Without you, I wouldn't even know where to begin." She looked at me for a long moment, then pressed her lips together. "I've met many people who've come back here looking for answers. Some are angry. Some are lost. You're different. You bring a kind of quiet patience. That's rare. But you should know, truth doesn't always give us what we want. It only gives us what we need to take the next step. That sentence stayed with me as I stepped out of the gray building. The Tucson afternoon sun was still sharp, but a dry breeze kicked up specks of dust along the street. I found a family-style diner on the corner. A wooden sign read, "Esther's Kitchen," and took a seat in the corner. I ordered a black coffee and a slice of apple pie. The place was nearly empty, just an elderly couple working on a crossword by the window. The waitress, a gray-haired woman in an apron, set down my cup and looked at me like she'd seen plenty of people come here searching for air. "You visiting from out of town?" she asked, warmly. "Yes, from North Carolina," I nodded. "I came to look for old records." She didn't ask further, just gave a soft, like a blanket being pulled up on a cold night. I opened the envelope Ruth had given me. The rustling of copied documents filled my hands, signatures, stamps, itemized fields, date of birth, place of birth, Santa Cruz County, Arizona, and a Wellspring ID code running along the margin. I took a pen and began sketching a timeline on a blank sheet of paper. Birth, transfer, placed with the Hayes family, routine monitoring. In between, I jotted down memories that aligned with those moments. Passing out at the Halloween festival when I was 10, a routine health check on my 16th birthday, a hospital visit on my 18th birthday, just in case before college. Just in case before college. Just in case before college became on. I texted Heather. "I'm in Tucson. I have the records. I think I found the name of the caseworker from back then." She replied almost immediately. "I'm with you." A short, simple sentence, no explanations. But something in my chest felt a little lighter. After eating, I returned to the hotel on the edge of downtown Tucson. A place so ordinary it could be invisible. Dark carpet, a humming ice machine, long hallways with identical doors. I placed the folder on the desk, opened my laptop, and typed the name of that medical organization, Wellspring Medical Foundation, into the search bar. Dozens of results came up: research, support funds, screening programs, a few articles debating the ethics of private institutions deeply involved in the adoption process. Nothing mentioned Tucson in 2001. Nothing mentioned medically designated placement. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the dim glow of the screen. Some things aren't on the internet. They live in metal file cabinets, in cloth-bound logs in storage rooms, in the memories of someone like Ruth, in the faded pencil scrawl of someone named Janet Pike. I picked up the phone and dialed the number Ruth had given me. The automated voice said, "Number not in service." I tried swapping a couple of digits. The line rang. A cautious, middle-aged woman's voice came through. "Hello? Sorry, is this Janet Pike?" A long pause. "Who's speaking?" "My name is Danielle," though I took a breath. "But in the file you once wrote, I was Marisol Beck. In 2001, you were a caseworker at Sonoran. I just want to ask a few things about my file, if you're willing." On the other end, a quiet sigh, then her voice dropped. "I've been out of this work for over a decade. How did you find me?" "From a note card you wrote in pencil," I said, trying to keep my tone sincere. "I'm not here to blame you. I just need to know, why is my name tied to Wellspring, and what did medically displacement placement mean?" Another long silence, long enough for someone to decide whether or not to return to a past they left behind. "I remember that case," she finally said. "Back then, things were given names that sounded easier to accept. Cooperation, care coordination. The truth is, some families wanted a backup option in case something went wrong. Wellspring was the go-between. We, admin staff, were told to just process the paperwork." "Do you know who my birth parents were?" I asked quietly. "I know the names, but I can't disclose them," Janet said, her voice softer. "But I do have something else, a fax I kept because it didn't sit right with me. It includes the adoptive file code and a handwritten note. Match Melissa Hayes, pending medical clearance. If you'd like, I can send you a photo of it. It's not official documentation, but it's the only thing I have left. I swallowed hard. Please send it to me. I gave her my email. Thank you for not throwing it away. Back then, I didn't have the courage to ask questions, she said slowly. Maybe this is my late way of making a small part right. You should know, whatever the reason, you are still a human being. No one has the right to reduce you to a compatible number. The line went dead. I sat for a long time, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. A moment later, the email arrived. It was a photo of a faded fax, coffee stains on the edge. The handwritten line was exactly as Janet had said. At the bottom was a short signature. TH. I zoomed in. 3 tight, deliberate strokes. TH. I whispered. A doctor, a lawyer, a coordinator. I printed the image using the hotel lobby's printer and added it to the folder. Next to it was the timeline I had drawn on a blank sheet. Each milestone now more defined, like wooden stakes driven into dry ground. From my birth in Santa Cruz County, to the transfer to Sonoran, then the express delivery, file code 91 Hazelroth ASRH, Janet Pike Wellspring, and the TH signature. The pieces still didn't fit perfectly, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing outside my own story. I was laying the foundation myself, on my terms. Outside the window, the desert dusk fell like layers of bronze. Evening light gathered over the distant mountain ranges, thin shades of violet stretching across the sky. I stood, poured a glass of water from the pitcher, sipped slowly. On the table, Ruth's thick envelope rested next to my hurried notes, the blurry fax, and an old Christmas photo. I touched the picture, my fingers pausing at the empty space where I should have been standing. No final answers came tonight, only the solid silence of a desert that had spoken to me in a language beyond words. Some truths are dry and rough, but it's that very roughness that keeps them from slipping away. They stay, and they become the ground we walk on. And for the first time, I felt my feet truly touch the earth. I returned to Raleigh on a cloudy morning, the sky veiled in a thin fog of unspoken things. After 3 days in Tucson, I brought back not just a thicker file about my real identity, but also the clear silence of those who had chosen the role of spectators in my life. That silence was no longer a wound. Now, it was a reminder. I no longer owed anyone my own silence. When I got back to the short-term apartment near the hospital, I hadn't even taken off my shoes when the phone rang. It was Heather. I've printed the audio recording, and you should hear it yourself. I nodded, though Heather couldn't see me. She didn't need to convince me. Melissa's voice in that recording had already awakened everything I'd buried for years. That night, at a small cafe on the corner, Heather handed me a USB stick. That day, I accidentally left my phone recording when Melissa came to find me. She thought I was still mad at you about high school, so she ran her mouth. I didn't cut anything. Just listened to it, unedited. I didn't wait. Back home, I plugged the device into my laptop. The screen lit up with an audio file nearly 11 minutes long. I put on my headphones, closed my eyes, and pressed play. Melissa's voice rang out, clear and familiar, so much so that it sent a chill down my spine. Danielle? Her voice laughed, then lingered on each word. She actually thought she was part of the family. That's adorable. We only kept her because of the genetic compatibility, Heather. Mom used to say, that girl is a living backup card. One time is enough. We're not letting Melissa die again. Heather's voice followed, probably awkwardly, and she had no idea. Didn't even know her real name. Thought Mom actually cared about her. So sad. I ripped off the headphones. I couldn't listen anymore. Not because I hadn't considered the possibility, but because hearing it in that voice, the one that used to lie on the pillow next to mine, the one that held my hand while pretending to cry in hospital rooms, made me feel betrayed in an entirely new way. Not long after, I went to the hospital to retrieve my personal medical documents, an excuse to be near Melissa's treatment wing. I didn't plan to confront her directly, not then, but my silence needed a counterpoint. I wanted to see her clearly, without cameras, without mom standing nearby, without a performance for anyone else. I stood in the hallway near room 417 where Melissa was receiving treatment. Through the frosted glass, I saw her lying on her side. Her hair had been cut short from the rounds of chemotherapy, but she still somehow managed to look put together, as if even illness had been curated not to disrupt her image. She was scrolling on her phone and occasionally let out a smug chuckle. No one was with her. I didn't feel pity, I only felt clarity. On my way back, I decided to take a detour and head straight to the hospital records office. A young resident greeted me, polite but a little uneasy when I asked to print my entire medical history for the past 20 years. "Can you give a specific reason?" he asked, his voice hesitant. I smiled, but didn't explain. I simply said, "I can provide a letter from my lawyer if necessary, but I believe my rights allow me to do this." It took over an hour to compile everything. While I waited, I sat in a small corner near the hallway and realized this place looked exactly like those yearly checkups my mom used to take me to. Always my mom. Always in the spring, and always for preventative tests that no one ever explained clearly. When I received the stack of records, I immediately noticed a familiar pattern. A liver and kidney function tracking chart done once a year since I was 6. I flipped to the most recent test, just a few months before my mom passed away. Under the requesting doctor's name was a handwritten note. Dr. Th. That abbreviation again? I asked the records clerk, "Is there a doctor here whose name starts with T and last name begins with H?" She checked the system and nodded. "There used to be one, Dr. Thomas Huxley. He retired last year." I jotted down his contact info and left the hospital. Back home, I found an old interview with Dr. Huxley in a medical journal, an article about ethical standards in organ transplantation. I read every line, feeling everything slowly but surely converge toward a single point. This wasn't just my story. There could be other Danielles, other Marisols, once labeled as medically compatible by people hiding behind the title of coordinated care. That evening, I sat at the table and reopened all the files from Tucson, the fax photo from Janet Pike and the printed test results from the hospital, the papers stacked up like a case file. But this time, I wasn't the one being monitored. I was the investigator. I was the one asking questions. And this time, I wouldn't stay silent. If you think this couldn't possibly happen in a family, just keep listening. I scheduled a meeting with Dr. Thomas Huxley on a cloudy Tuesday morning. He lived in a small house on the northern outskirts of Raleigh, near the Botanical Gardens. A cottage-style home with a white fence, a gravel path, and lavender bushes lining the walkway. The scent of lavender stopped me in my tracks. It reminded me of my mother. Not in a comforting way, but like the perfume she always used to mask those unexplained routine medical visits. He opened the door, slender frame, thinning silver hair, bright but weary eyes. Buttoned-up shirt, dark wool tie. He studied me for a moment before opening the door wider. "You're Danielle Hayes?" he asked, voice deep and calm. "I used to be," I replied, extending my hand. "Today, I need you to confirm something else about me." The living room was neat, with pencil sketches on the walls, child portraits, a few smiling faces, some thoughtful profiles. He poured tea without asking what I wanted, placed the cup on the wooden table, and sat across from me. "You're here because of Wellspring, aren't you?" He got straight to the point. "Not just Wellspring," I said, pulling out my files. "Liver and kidney function tests since I was 6. The fax from Janet Pike, tracking forms signed with the initials TH. I'm here because of all the forms you signed my name to, the ones I didn't understand." He flipped through them slowly, nodding as if confirming what he already knew. Yes, I signed them. And I kept copies of many documents. Back then, I thought I was just following protocol, but protocol has a way of turning people into data points. I looked at him. In that moment, there were no formalities between us. Just a person trying to understand who she was, and someone who had once stood near where the answer had been sealed. "Why me?" I asked. He leaned back, hands clasped, eyes focused somewhere behind me like rereading an old case file. In 2001, I was part of a private medical coordination group in Tucson. A family from North Carolina contacted Wellspring through their private attorney. Their daughter, Melissa, had chronic kidney disease. They weren't looking for a donor immediately, they were preparing a plan. Wellspring scanned newborn records and suggested a high compatibility case. You, then Marisol Beck, were selected. I was assigned to assess the medical file. You knew about me before I ever set foot in North Carolina? I knew a string of values. Blood type, liver enzymes, genetic markers. Not the person sitting in front of me with brown eyes and a name. When you were brought to Raleigh, I thought my part was done. But your adoptive mother requested a doctor familiar with the case for regular checkups. So I kept signing, kept scheduling, kept watching the numbers stay steady, and stayed silent. You were okay with that? I asked directly, with a child being assigned the role of backup without her knowing? He didn't defend himself. His eyes closed for a second and opened again, filled with the weariness of someone done lying. No. But I kept telling myself it was protocol. Until I realized I was signing off on things that let someone grow up without the right to know who they were. That's when I started saving copies. I knew someday, if I was lucky, the person who needed the truth would come back. My hands clenched together under the table as waves of emotion collided inside me. I reached into my bag and pulled out the fax photo Janet had sent. Coffee-stained, scribbled with tea. "Is this yours?" He leaned forward, examined it carefully, then shook his head. "That's Thomas Henley, a former legal coordinator for Wellspring. He left the board in 2006, passed away in 2012. Same initials, different handwriting." Another piece of the puzzle lit up. I took out the USB drive Heather had given me and placed it on the table. "This is a recording of Melissa. She said outright, 'Danielle is a living backup card.' I don't know if that's enough for anyone else, but for me, it ends all doubt." "Ethically, it says too much," he replied. "Legally, it would need metadata, timestamp, source verification. But more importantly, I can provide the recurring test requests your mom signed. With her stated reason of preventative measures, it shows an intention that lasted for years. You said my mother, but she..." I paused, careful with the wording. "Coraline was my legal guardian. I don't deny the meals, the warm coats in winter, the ice cream in summer. But if all that care was built on a different kind of intent, then it was management, not love," he finished. That sentence hit the table like a small stone, but the ripples it made were vast. He stood up, went into his study, and returned with a brown folder. Inside were copies of test orders, abdominal ultrasound referrals, and annual liver enzyme and kidney function panels starting from when I was 6. One per year, always in spring. In the top left corner, signed C. Hayes. Occasionally, a sticky note was attached. "Ensure stable levels. Avoid unnecessary OTC medication." "What about the medical chip listed in my immunization records?" I asked. "What is that?" He let out a soft breath. "It's not a tracking device like in the movies. It's a passive RFID microchip, about the size of a grain of rice, used back then as an internal medical ID tag at a few experimental facilities. It didn't emit a signal, only readable from very close with a scanner. The official reason? In case of emergencies with no documentation. The unofficial reason? Identity syncing during sample collection." I objected from the start, but she signed separate consent and cited child safety. Did you ever think to tell me? I didn't, he said slowly. I justified it by saying, kids don't need to know that kind of thing, but now I know that was wrong. We sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the wind moved through the lavender hedge, and thin strips of sunlight wavered across the carpet. I looked at the papers in front of me. Everything that had once made me feel cared for now appeared as markers of control. I didn't come here to blame you, I said. I came to fill in the blanks, so that when I say this is who I am, it's not based on what someone else told me. He nodded and slid the folder across the table. Take it all with you. There's even a meeting memo from 2009 between me, the Hayes family lawyer, and a Wellspring representative. Just a summary, not the full transcript. But there's a line in there. Family prefers not to disclose adoption status unless required for medical consent. I underlined that part. You'll see it. I flipped through and saw it. A pencil line drawn neatly beneath the words, medical consent. It was the first time I saw the purpose of silence written out, plain, exposed, and unpoetic. Do you think my mother loved me? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. He thought for a long while. I think she loved the way she believed was right, but that kind of love put the goal before the person. And when you put the goal before the person, the things you do for the good of the family often become the things that hurt the most. And the ones who get hurt are usually the ones with the least say. Something in his eyes seemed to release. Not tears, but the exhaustion of someone who had taken the long way back just to finally say what should have been said at the beginning. Thank you, I said. Not for keeping the documents, but for telling the truth. I stood up. He walked me to the door. As we passed the garden, I paused for a moment and leaned down to gently touch one lavender bloom. This scent used to make me feel safe, I said. Today, I want to remember it as the day I reclaimed the right to name things for myself. He gave me a faint smile. When you rename something, the old things change shape. They don't disappear, but they no longer get to define you. I stepped down the gravel path, light filtering through the leaves, and my heartbeat slowed by half a pace. In my hand was a heavy folder, but inside, I felt lighter. I got into my car, buckled up, and placed the folder on the passenger seat, like setting down a silent passenger. On the way home, I stopped at a small riverside park and sat on an old wooden bench facing the water. I opened the folder and arranged the documents in order. Wellspring, dress for meeting, recurring test records, 2009 meeting memo, test requisitions, TH, initials, Henley, and full signature from Huxley. On each page, I attached a note that read, "This is my body, and this is its history." I texted Heather. I met Huxley. Got the files, got the memo. I'll scan everything tomorrow afternoon. She replied, I'm nearby. Want someone to sit with you? I looked out at the water, thought of the countless times I sat alone in waiting rooms, the way Mom always looked away when the nurse asked if I was scared of needles. Then I typed, "Yeah, come sit. You don't have to say anything." Before leaving the park, I opened my phone and took a photo of the page with medical consent and Huxley's underlined mark. I didn't post it. I just saved it and titled the file, "I Name the Truth." I knew the road ahead would be long. There would be denial, familiar faces turning into strangers, but right now, I had something I never had before. A file where I was no longer just the footnote. I was the headline. I was the one writing. And from this moment on, no one else would speak my story for me. That night, after scanning the final documents from my meeting with Dr. Huxley, it felt like I had rearranged the very marrow of my being into layers of records. Each page was a punctuation mark on a past finally closed, but I knew I wasn't ready to file it away just yet. What I held could shake the foundation of the Hayes family. if I found the courage to speak. And then something I never expected happened the next morning. I woke to the sound of pounding on my door. Not the mailman, not the building manager. I cracked it open just enough to see my father. He stood there, upright, wearing a neatly tucked white shirt like he was heading to a board meeting. His face was unreadable. In his hand was a large envelope. "Danielle, we need to talk." I didn't invite him in. I stood in the doorway, keeping a careful distance. "I thought you said I was a selfish mistake." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not here to revise my words. I'm here to explain what you don't understand. Your mother is gone. My eldest daughter is in the hospital. This family is on the brink of being exposed by one of its own, and I, whether I like it or not, am the only one left with enough clarity to protect what's left of our honor." I spoke slowly, every word sharpened. "You think this is about honor?" "It's all about honor, Danielle. The name, the reputation, the social standing. And you're turning it into a moral crusade. Your emotions are one thing, but you're putting this entire family at risk of public disgrace." The first recording session was held in the studio of local station WNCN. I used my real name, told the real story, and brought my attorney. I presented documents proving over 20 years of unlawful medical monitoring, forged authorization papers, and the contract with the Wellspring organization. My face went on air that evening. No heavy makeup, no scripted lines. Just a woman recounting her search for humanity inside a family that once seemed perfect. 4 days later, I got a call from Durham Memorial Hospital. "Danielle, I am the head nurse from the dialysis unit. I need to inform you, Melissa Hayes has just been transferred out of the system. At her family's directive. No contact information left behind." I paused a few seconds. Then I understood. They were retreating. Not because they were innocent, but because they were preparing for something bigger. Legally, in the media, and likely a counterattack. 3 days after that, my family's private attorney reached out by email. "Dear Miss Hayes, the Hayes family is considering legal action against you for defamation, unauthorized disclosure of personal information, and for causing harm to the business reputation and mental well-being of family members. However, before initiating legal proceedings, we would like to propose a mediation meeting. If you agree, we are prepared to arrange it at our private office in Chapel Hill." I finished reading. I didn't feel angry. I just felt steadier inside. This is what they always did: silence others with power, reputation, and attorneys. I forwarded the email to Jessica, and she replied within 3 minutes. "Danielle, if they dare bring this to court, it'll be the most closely watched trial of the year, and I'll be in the front row." I looked back at what I'd written, the messages I had received, and all the people who had once been seen as backups in someone else's story. There was no turning back. I walked into that meeting room in Chapel Hill with 2 women by my side. My attorney, Mrs. Carmela Reyes, who had worked on multiple medical ethics lawsuits, and investigative journalist Jessica Klein. Neither of these women were related to me by blood. But in that moment, I knew for certain I wasn't walking in alone. Across the table sat my father, Richard Hayes, in a perfectly tailored silver-gray suit, tie neatly knotted, face unreadable. My mother sat next to him, eyes avoiding mine, her softly curled hair styled as if she were headed to a gala instead of a mediation meeting about the truth. To their left sat Melissa, my sister, or rather the organ recipient, as the Wellspring documents had phrased it. She still looked noticeably thinner, but her eyes were different. Not weak, sharp, determined. The meeting opened with my family's attorney reading a long statement about reputation damage, Mrs. Hayes' emotional collapse, and the danger of online misinformation. I listened without interrupting. Occasionally, I caught my mother's eyes. She looked at me like I was a stranger bringing irreversible shame to the family. When it was my turn, I said only one sentence. "I didn't lie. Everything is documented." Then I pulled out a folder, each page printed clearly, tagged with yellow sticky notes. A copy of the organ donation contract, medical records starting when I was 13, email threads between my father and Wellspring. I handed them over, one at a time, peeling back every layer they had wrapped in the illusion of noble sacrifice. My father kept his calm expression, nodding slightly as if he had anticipated it, but my mother didn't. "You think I knew about all this?" she said, speaking up for the first time, voice trembling but not weak. "I never saw that contract. I was deceived too, but I couldn't let this destroy the family." I looked straight at her. "You had 20 years to stand beside me. You stayed silent. And now you call that protecting the family?" The room fell silent. No one said another word. Jessica reached for her recorder and turned it on, a wordless statement that the time for lies was over. After the meeting, I rejected all offers. No hush money, no retraction of my post. Carmela and I were prepared for a legal battle if it came to that. 2 weeks later, a nonprofit called Voices for the Forgotten reached out. They provide support for individuals exploited in unethical medical systems, especially children within adoption structures. They invited me to speak at their annual conference in Washington, D.C., alongside other witnesses and lawmakers working to change federal policy. I didn't know if I had the strength, but I remembered the messages. "You're not alone." And I chose to stand up. The conference took place in a hotel near Capitol Hill. That day, I stepped onto the stage in a simple navy blazer. No makeup crew, no PR team, just me. And the truth. I shared everything without skipping a single detail, from discovering I wasn't their biological child, to living as a medical backup, to facing the very people who had signed the contract, turning me into a biologically compatible subject. When I finished, the room was silent. Then a woman stood up, around 50, gray-haired, tears running down her face, and said loudly, "Thank you. You said what I never dared to say." I stepped down from the stage. I no longer felt small. After the event, I received dozens of interview invitations, policy discussions, and book offers. But the most important came in a short email from the National Commission on Medical Ethics, inviting me to join a panel developing new guidelines for children's rights in family-based medical decisions. I read every line of that email, then smiled, because for the first time, my voice hadn't been ignored. If you've ever been forced to sacrifice for someone else without having a choice, walk with me through this story. The day I returned to Durham, it was drizzling. Not a stormy downpour, but that quiet, steady kind of rain, as if the sky itself was shedding something old. I stepped off the train, no one waiting to meet me, but I didn't feel alone. Instead, there was a quiet strength in me, as if I'd just made it through a storm I never believed I could survive, and somehow, I was still standing. Melissa was the first to reach out. No lawyers, no intermediaries, just a short message. "Can I see you?" I sat in silence for a few minutes before responding. Not because I was still angry, but because I wasn't sure if I had enough trust left to open a door that had once hurt me so deeply. But then I typed, "Forest Hills Park, 3 p.m. When I arrived, she was already there. Thinner, her hair shorter, wearing a hoodie and faded jeans. She didn't look like the glamorous version of herself I used to see at family parties, and she definitely didn't look like the cold woman who sat silently through the mediation. But her eyes were different. No longer cold, no longer guarded. Just a sadness, not unlike the one I once carried. "I didn't expect you to be the one to reach out," I said. "I didn't think I'd be brave enough to do this either. But I need to say something. Something I've been holding in for a very long time." I sat beside her, saying nothing. Melissa took a deep breath and began. "Mom says I've always known Danielle. I found out when I was 16 after overhearing one of Dad's calls. I heard him say I needed to be protected to keep the kidneys stable. I didn't understand everything, but I knew something was wrong. When I asked Mom, she just said I had a congenital condition and that they were doing everything to help me live longer." I turned to look at her. "You never thought to say anything." I was a kid. And honestly, I was scared. I was terrified that if I spoke up, they'd abandon me. I was the only child with their blood, and they made me believe I owed my life to their sacrifices. I believed I had a debt to pay, that I couldn't disappoint them. I fell quiet. For years, I had blamed her for her silence, but now I saw a girl who had been trapped in a golden cage, built of expectations and fear. "What did you feel when I spoke up?" I asked. At first, anger, then fear, then relief. She turned to me, her eyes full of tears. "I never said this before, but I've always known you weren't like me. You saw things clearly. You asked questions, you walked away. I was jealous of that, then ashamed. But now I just want to say thank you for doing what I couldn't." I didn't know what to say. The anger I'd held for years unraveled in that moment, undone by a wordless apology. We sat together for a long while, saying nothing more. The light rain seemed to preserve that moment. Two women once placed at opposite ends of a scale, tilted by injustice, finally meeting in the middle. A few days later, I received a handwritten letter. It was from my mother. The handwriting was shaky, slightly tilted, but unmistakably the same script I'd once seen on childhood birthday cards. In the letter, she didn't explain nor defend herself. She simply shared that she had stepped down from the board of Wellspring, that she was now attending a support group for parents who had been part of commercial adoption models, and she ended with one line: "You were never the backup plan. You were the truth I was too afraid to face." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not to forget, but to keep, as proof that some wounds, if given enough time and light, can begin to heal. One April morning, I returned to the old house. It had been sold and was now the office of a community outreach group. I walked around to the back, to where the old wooden swing still hung under the big maple tree. It was still there, slightly tilted, the rope worn. I sat down, closed my eyes. I was no longer the child chosen to save someone else. I was a woman choosing how to live for herself. I returned to the old hospital one morning in early June, nearly 20 years after I had left, with a scar on my side and a silence no one cared to name. Wellspring still stood, bright, orderly on the outside, but to me, every glass pane reflected a youth distorted by choices that were never mine. I hadn't come to reclaim anything. I came to end a cycle. In my bag was a thick envelope containing the final manuscript of a document I had worked on for nearly a year with the Voices for the Forgotten team. It was titled Guidelines for Biomedical Autonomy in Substitute Family Models, a legal, ethical, and educational framework. Not everyone would care for such dry text, but to me, every word held the breath of children once silenced, like I had been. I was greeted by a young doctor named Hannah. She hadn't worked there back when I was a patient. She lowered her eyes slightly when she read my name on the appointment notice. "We've read your report. Some of the old board members have retired. The new leadership, they're trying to fix what went wrong." I nodded. Not everyone is bad. But silence is its own form of complicity. I knew that far too well. We sat in a small conference room as I gave a brief presentation. My hope was for the document to be included in new staff training and to initiate open dialogues about personal rights in adolescent medical care. When I left, Hannah walked me to the gate. Before we parted, she gently squeezed my hand. "Thank you for not disappearing like so many others." I didn't say anything, just looked at her and turned away. Some thank yous don't need replies. They only need to be left behind, like a trace. After that, I moved to live near Asheville, North Carolina, a small house on a hillside with a backyard big enough for mint, carrots, and a few rows of white daisies. I no longer chased conferences, no longer spent nights editing reports. I had done my part. Each morning, I made coffee, turned on my old radio, and listened to women over 50 share their stories of living truthfully. Once, during an interview, I heard Melissa, my sister. She spoke about her volunteer work at a post-transplant recovery center, helping patients with no families feel heard. Her voice was deep, measured, but steady. Some sacrifices should never be placed on anyone, especially not on children. I looked out at the garden, where the sunlight filtered through the leaves. Things might never go back to the way they were, but sometimes it's the old cracks where the light gets in. One summer, I received a package from an independent publisher in DC. Inside was the first printed copy of the book I had written, based on old journals, talks, and never published letters. The title read, "Not the Backup Plan, A Journey to Reclaim My Voice." I don't think it will be a bestseller, but I do know this. If some little girl in Idaho or Alabama, curled up behind her bedroom door, feeling like she doesn't belong, reads the first page, then that's enough. I placed the book on the shelf right next to the old journal my mother used to track my prescriptions. On one torn, faded page, there was a smudged note written in blue ink. "Danielle needs more than a healthy body. She needs a real life." I sat down, gently brushing my hand over the page. In the end, maybe my mother did understand. It was just too late to say it out loud. But I didn't need her to say it. I lived, fully enough, truly enough, wholly myself. I'm telling this story not to reopen old wounds, but to say this. Sometimes what we need isn't someone else's apology, but our own recognition that we survived, that we stood firm, and that we're still moving forward. What about you? Have you ever felt pushed aside by your own family just because you didn't match what they expected? Have you ever had to choose between staying quiet to be loved or speaking up to be yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Every story matters, especially when we're willing to listen to one another. And if this story touched something in your heart, don't forget to hit follow so you don't miss the next ones. Real journeys about family, heartbreak, and how we learn to forgive both others and ourselves.